See if the record thing pops up. Does it say recording on your end?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I didn't see it on mine. Okay, so let me start my slideshow, and I'm going to talk about our next project. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So your next project is the analogous color scheme hybrid. So before we get started talking about the actual painting, let's look at the color wheel. We have a few different, 6 different color schemes that are being laid out for you here. So the color wheel is arranged with complementary colors. That means they're colors on the complete opposite side of the color wheel. So orange and blue is the one that they are showing you here. We won't be using this one, but this is a great way to make colors stand out against one another. An orange and a blue will kind of pop, or they say they vibrate when they're put right next to each other. There is a tetradic color scheme, which is a rectangle. That's the next one. We're not going to be using that one. We will be using the analogous, which is 3 or 4 colors right next to each other on the color wheel. So what that does is it creates a sort of color harmony or a visual harmony within an image. There are a few tricks to make it work really well for you, and we'll talk about that at the end. Then there's a triadic, which is 3 colors equally spaced on the color wheel. There's a square, and there's split complementary. So you take a complementary color scheme, but then instead of using the complement, you use the colors on opposite sides. And so it kind of tells you what those are used for. Your book, your reading that is due Thursday, it's pages 94 to 105. It also discusses these color schemes. So this will help you kind of figure out a color scheme for your painting. So artists use color schemes for several reasons. One of them is to make us feel certain things. So you may have heard Picasso had a few different periods of art, of painting. So he had a blue period and then a rose period. So the blue period, what does blue make you think of normally?
I guess either peacefulness or sometimes sadness.
Okay, yes. So Picasso, from what I remember, him and his friend were fighting over the same woman. And then the friend actually died. And so Picasso was kind of thrown into this depression. He didn't get the girl. His friend died or committed suicide or something. It was a very sad story. So he was in kind of a depressed state during the blue period. It lasted, I think, like 2 years. And the rose period came shortly after that. This was his like emergence from the blue period. And so these rosy colors are more, they're meant to be happier. He painted a lot of circus themes during this period. So artists use these color schemes, again, to make us feel something. Here's an analogous color scheme. We have blue, purple. There's a little bit of this like reddish violet, so it even goes further into the warm colors. What is this painting? What is the mood evoked by these colors, do you think?
I like it. It's kind of serene. It makes me think of a sunrise.
Yeah, it's kind of quiet, isn't it? Because the colors aren't super vibrant. They're almost muted blues, muted purples, muted red violets. Monet uses this quite often. Sorry, that's a blurry image, but this is an analogous color scheme too. So their colors immediately next to each other on the color wheel. Greens, there's some yellows, there's blues, there's even some violets. These little red pops of color, those, let's say you wanted to throw a few little spots of color into your paintings, that's totally fine. You can do that for this project, but it can't be a lot. It can be just to make something stand out. So the idea behind this is you're going to be using an analogous color scheme, so 3 or 4 colors, that's it. But you can use white, gray, and black. Those are free. But you then need to create a hybrid. So it could be 2 things put together, 3 things put together, as many as you want, but at least 2 things that don't belong. So a tree and I don't know what this is, a werewolf of some kind. So these are examples I just found online. These are not student examples. I'll get to those in a minute. So Yeah, this one makes me laugh. So the other part of this project that I threw in is that you need to put them in a place where they would belong. So this person just did a black background. This is a professional painter, but I would like you to actually have a background. This is a pencil drawing of mine from college. We had to do this project too. And yeah, I would like you to have them placed in a spot where they might be. So these are some of my past student examples. Some students chose to put like a bigger meaning behind them. For example, this person did, I don't know if you can see here, there's an outlet. So they were kind of concerned about the state of the world and how, you know, technology is kind of overtaking. Then there are others who are more, I don't know, happier with the world. This is more of a calm painting instead of talking about something overtaking the world. So this person actually strayed a little bit because they're using almost complementary colors here. And you could do that if you want something to pop. Because if this was a greenish yellow, it wouldn't stand out as much. So these, I want you to use your imagination, be as creative as possible. So if you look at the rubrics for the finished projects, that is the first thing, creativity and originality. So I do not want you to take something that already exists out there. I want you to come up with something completely different. I love this one. This student did use white paint here just to create some of those spiderwebby strings, I guess. So these are hands. It's kind of hard to see, but they're fingers here, and they're grasping each other. Just a couple more of these. This one wasn't a hybrid, but it was an analogous color scheme, so I put it on here. Again, this one is not a hybrid, it's just an analogous color scheme. So depending on which colors you choose on the color wheel, you can make us feel a very particular way. So think about that with your choices. All right, let me come back to our meeting here. Okay. So think about that when you are coming up with some ideas. So those sketches are due this Thursday by midnight, along with your reading. So I don't have technically an assignment for the reading, but it will help you figure out colors. They talk about all the different color schemes. Analogous is on there. So definitely take a look at that and read that. Okay, let's talk about composition, because you guys are going to be coming up with your own compositions. I just have to move my computer around and plug in on the other wall. So you guys are going to be coming up with your own compositions rather than like the last image was you using someone else's. I'm going to flip my computer upside down. If I lose you, I will jump back on, hopefully. Okay. Composition is also one of the on the rubric for how I grade you. So keep that in mind. Very important. Okay. Can you see my squares?
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so when we are creating a composition, what creates a good composition is usually leading our eye. The objects within the image are leading our eye throughout the whole thing rather than just sitting in one spot. So let's say we have a sphere that we're drawing or painting. This is not necessarily a good composition because our eye goes right to the sphere. If we, let's say, add a shadow going this way, that at least brings our eye to this bottom right corner, which helps to create a good composition. What if we also created a table line here, and then to bring our eye to this side of the composition, if you added a dark value on this side, and then had it change to a slightly lighter value so you have a gradient in the background. This helps our eye move throughout the composition. And then you can also have maybe a darker value here at the bottom right corner. So it creates kind of this diagonal. That is what makes a good composition if you have an object in the center. If you have an object toward the edge, so one thing to think about when you are creating your images, you have a circle right up against an edge that is very, very close. What happens when there's something like that is our eye goes immediately there. So if you think about Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam, and the fingers, Adam and God's fingers are just about to touch, that proximity, which is what's happening here, that's what draws our eye to that space. So if you want your eye, the viewer's eye, to go right here, great. But what that means is that the rest of the image doesn't really matter. So all the work that you put into all the stuff that's over here, the viewer's eye is going to go there. So what I would do just to help that is to bring the object over slightly, or you can have something else coming in from this side. And that also helps to kind of balance the composition. It brings our eye here, but it also brings our eye to this side. So that's something to keep in mind. What if I had, let's see, what if I had something like this and like this? What else would you do here? You could put their shadows from these spheres. Maybe they're like floating in the air or something. You could put the shadows from these spheres. That way the whole composition is being taken up. Another thing to avoid is not only putting things really close to the edge of your paper, and putting things in the center. Not necessarily a great thing to do unless you can use the other elements to kind of counteract that. I wouldn't split a composition horizontally, and have like something up here and something down here that doesn't cross. Like you should have some kind of object. I don't know what this is. This is just a monolith of some kind. You should have at least one or two things crossing the horizon. The problem with this is now we have a mirror image, which sometimes you might want a mirror image. Other times it doesn't really make for a great composition. So I would, if you have two objects, try not to have just two objects. So if you add just a third, that creates one more element in the composition. It creates a triangle. So I don't know if you've heard the concept of threes in art. Usually create a good composition if you could split the composition into 3 segments, or if there are 3 objects. So usually just 2 is not completely ideal. Let's see. What if we have a triangle down here that's dark? What would you do to make this a good composition?
I'd add something in the upper half, like probably towards the left, like something dark to bring it together, or a diagonal line connecting it.
A diagonal line like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, then you have 3. You can, if you didn't do that, let's see, this is dark. You can add something up here. Maybe this is a hill. There's the sun, and there's Sisyphus pushing a boulder up the mountain. So you could do that. But then you have all of this negative space, which is fine. A lot of times sometimes we feel the need to fill the whole composition, and that's not necessary either. If you have a lot of stuff going on, it is really nice to have some areas of rest. That allows our eye to kind of take a break from looking at all the other stuff. If you look at an image where it's just completely covered, sometimes we get overwhelmed by that, and that's also a problem. So when you guys are doing your sketches, think about this, think about composition, placement of your object or animal. It could be different figures, it could be made up figures. It doesn't have to be anything real. Let's say you're creating, I don't know, some sort of like manga characters or something. You could do that mixed with an object, or you decide. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. So there's that. Do you have questions about composition?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. So another thing I want to talk about is shadows. Because we are creating images that don't actually exist and objects that don't actually exist, you're going to have to think about placement of light and placement of your shadows. So shadows, like we just saw, shadows can help make a good composition. Oops. Shadows can help make a good composition. If we don't have them, like in this one, our composition would be bad. Not bad, but it would just be unbalanced. So I want to show you just a very simple trick for coming up with your light source. So let's say, or coming up with where your shadow might be. Let's say you have a sphere. I feel like I should use a pen so you could see this better. Let's see. I do have a pen here. That's surprising. I never have pens in my studio. Okay. So let's say you have a sphere. You can, let's place our light source right here. So that's our light source. All you have to do to figure out how long your shadow is going to be and where your shadow is going to go is from the outer edges of your light to the outer edges of your object. You're going to draw a dashed line. Let's say this is the table that it's sitting on. So you're going to draw a dashed line adjacent to the edges of your object. Oops. And this is going to go kind of off the paper. And so now we know that our shadow, because it's a round object, is going to look something like that. And it's going to go off the paper a little bit. If you have a light source right above, you're going to do the same thing. So you're going to draw a dotted line touching the edges of your object to the ground that it's sitting on. And we know that that is the size of our shadow. Okay, so you can do this with something other than a square. Let's do a cube, just for sake of simplicity. Okay, so let's say you have your light source here. Same deal. My lines are completely not straight, but that's okay. So that's where the end of my shadow is going to be. So we have to think in three dimensions here, because even though this is a two-dimensional shape. So if you think about where the outer corner is going to come, so this is the outer corner that's kind of facing us. And we're also going to do to this edge here. Okay, so this is going to be the shadow. Okay, so when you're coming up with your objects, your hybrids, think about placement of your shadows, not only for composition, but think about the placement of light and the shape of what your shadows would look like. So when you actually go to paint them, it looks like a real thing. It looks like it would actually belong, and it's not just like a blob of darkness underneath. Does this idea make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's see. So shadows. Let's do some trees. So we're going to do just a little demonstration of trees, because I feel like for this project, a lot of people tend to go with nature. If they're specifically not interested in painting fur or human beings. So I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of how to paint some trees. Whoopsies. I will be doing a demonstration. I'll post it probably later this week because you guys have spring break next week. So I'll post it later this week of skin tones and how you might approach that, so you can watch it at your own leisure. And while we have spring break on my mind, so spring break is next week, and I believe I read that March 8th to the 10th, so I believe that's Monday to Wednesday, I believe Blackboard won't be working, or they won't be up. I think they're doing an update or something, so just keep that in mind. You won't, I don't think you'll have access, but double check on that. I'll have to double check too, because I think that's what I read. Okay, so I'm gonna mix together. Let's see, can you see my palette?
Yeah, is it okay if you make the screen bigger though?
Screen bigger?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can do that. I can
Like
make,
like the share screen is still on.
oh,
For the slideshow. Yeah.
yeah. Is that better?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Awesome, no problem. Okay, so let's do a little tree. So there are several ways to do trees. The easiest way, let's say we're doing a pine tree. If you have a fan brush, so I have two different fan brushes here. You have a fan brush. These are wonderful tools for doing trees. If you don't worry, I'll show you another way. So I'm gonna mix up some intense blue or phthalo blue with my lemon yellow. Ooh, that's a really super bright green. What I like to do for this technique, like evergreen trees, is I use my fan brush and I start with the, let's see, I start with the top. So I'm not using the fat side of my fan brush, I'm using the tip. And I create just a few little lines. Ooh, it says too much water. A few little lines before I make my fan brush flat. That way I can kind of control the top of my tree. And all I'm doing is just kind of dabbing my brush down, leaving little gaps. I'm moving side to side. And allowing the edges of my fan brush to create the edges of my tree. So I'm gonna add a little bit of ultramarine to this, and I can go in and on the bottom edges, I can create a little bit of shadow on some of these. Let's say my light is coming from the left side, then the shadows on the tree would be on the right. Okay, you can also do something similar with just a regular brush, a round brush. Just takes a little bit more time, which is fine. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to kind of swish my brush back and forth. So I'm kind of dabbing instead of just doing long lines. So I'm dabbing so that it's not just straight across. I'm going to leave some gaps of white because trees are not necessarily filled in all the way. Oops. So you can do pine trees kind of like this, or Christmas trees, I guess. Pine trees, a lot of time the pine needles are only at the top. You can also add some yellow. Oops. So if I added some pure lemon yellow here to the left side, so that it looks like the sunlight might be hitting that side, and then took a little bit of ultramarine and added it into my green and did the same thing to the right side. Just kind of smushed it in. I'm working wet into wet. The stuff underneath, the first layer has already started to dry, but at least it's blending just a little. So you can do trees like that. To do trees, like deciduous trees, which are trees that turn red and yellow in the fall, and then they drop their leaves. So we can do something similar. You don't need a fan brush. I'm taking lemon yellow, a little bit of my cadmium yellow or gamboge, adding a little bit of ultramarine to it. To me, that creates more of a believable looking green. I like to start with either my middle color. So let's say in a tree that you're painting, you have a light leaf, a middle tone, and then you have a shadow leaf. So I like to start kind of in the middle, so I get a sense of placement of my leaves, and then I could figure out where my light leaves are going to be. So I'm imagining that there's going to be a tree here. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my brush and I'm dabbing. I'm so stippling. If you've taken drawing before, stippling just means little dots. You can stipple with paint too, with watercolor. So in my head, I'm imagining a circle, like the top of an elm tree or something. I'm letting some of the dots bleed together, and just like these two trees up here, I'm imagining that the shadow is going to be on the bottom side. So I'm leaving the top alone because in watercolor, remember, we can't go back to light colors or light values. We have to leave those light from the beginning. But I can paint into my dark areas with this color to kind of map out where my tree is going to be. Okay, maybe there are some areas that are clumped together a little bit more. Okay, and then I'm going to take my lighter value, so I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to my color. I'm adding more gamboge, and I'm going to do the same thing, just dabbing, stippling. Maybe some areas like below are a little bit clustered together, clumped together. Okay, and then maybe there's a branch down here. You can scrub a little if things start to dry to kind of blend them together. And then I can take a darker value. So I'm adding ultramarine to my green mixture to make it slightly darker. And again, I'm stippling. If you think about trees, they're not all, it's not completely round. So there are some areas like up here maybe where there's a branch that's sticking out. So it's going to make shadow underneath it. Maybe down here, maybe even down here. Notice that I didn't do branches yet. Branches and the tree trunk, generally I like to leave those till the end. And the reason is when we look at trees, a lot of times if there's a lot of leaves on it, we don't actually see many of the branches or the tree trunk. So I'm gonna mix up a tree trunk and branch color. I'm using yellow ochre right now, which, okay. Can you see that yellow ochre now? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay. Yellow ochre, I'm adding in a little bit of ultramarine that created this kind of brownish color. I mixed a little bit more ultramarine into it. A little too much. Okay. So now I have this like brownish color. I know you guys do have brown on your palettes, which you could use, but if you look at the color of tree trunks, a lot of times they're more of a gray blue. They have some brown in them, but to me, when I look at tree trunks, I see a lot more of a gray brown. Even sometimes, depending on the light, I see them as like a gray purple. Okay, so now I can go ahead and paint in where a tree trunk might be. I can add in just a hair more, whoopsies, a hair more ultramarine to that so that I have a shadow color that I can drop in. And by drop, I mean I'm dabbing again into the wet paint so that it kind of, it blends and looks like a shadow. Okay, so I'm going to pick up more of my tree trunk color and I'm going to switch size brushes because that one is way too big. And then you could use a really small brush, and in between those white spots that we left, you can kind of draw in, or you can paint in some little branches, which are hardly noticeable right now with this color that I mixed, but you get the idea. So that's how I would paint a tree. If you were doing not just an individual tree, but if you're doing just a bigger grouping of trees, let's do that with a bigger brush. Let's say you have a flat wash brush, so something like that, and you have this area that you're doing of trees. When you're doing bigger areas of trees, I would start with the lighter color so that you can kind of paint on top of those trees with the darker colors and the middle values. So this is my horizon line. I'm gonna come up with the shape of the tops of the trees. So what I like to do with doing something like this, let's say, you know, you have a field or something up front here, and then you just have a bunch of trees in the back. You can, with a flat brush, you can just turn your brush so it's on its edge and use that to create the tops of some of the trees. So some of them might be pine trees, maybe they're pointy at the top, some of them might be kind of rounded. So I would kind of alter that. Make sure not to let this line dry too quickly, otherwise you'll be scrubbing out a line. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a little bit of ultramarine to this color, and that was just ultramarine and the gamboge and lemon yellow. So now I'm kind of alternating, going flat and on the side of my brush. I'm going to leave some areas alone because the sunlight might be hitting some of those areas. Generally, when you look at clusters of trees, the bottom area is the darkest, so you can even add a little bit of Payne's gray. You can even do pure Payne's gray, actually, towards the bottom, and maybe even turn your brush up a little bit. Like that. And then I'm going to switch back to my smaller brush and pick up my middle green color. And you can, I would let this dry. This would be my like first layer. I would let that dry, and then I would do some more of this type of stuff on top of this. So this is just like a wet into wet quick background so that then you could add some detail. Not too much detail though, because if this was way in the distance, we really wouldn't see that much detail. So there's that. You can also, you can add just like a little bit of detail on some of these. Maybe there's some little pine trees that are sticking up that you can see some of the bristles, the pine needles. And then you could, you can take a tree trunk color, and maybe there's a few where you can see the tree trunks. I know in the video it's probably hard to see that, but yeah, so just a few different ways to paint trees. When you are doing trees, remember, try to do the leaves on top first, and then paint in your branches and your tree trunk. You can draw everything in, that way you know where some of the leaves are going to go. What else? Oh, and if you were doing a blue sky, let's say behind this tree, I would do the blue sky first, then do this on top of it. If you have the, if you are painting a big blue sky quickly enough and you're thinking on your feet and you're ready with a paper towel, the areas that are going to be lighter yellow, I would go ahead and dab the water off. That way, when you lay this down, it won't turn a darker green. Questions about trees? Okay, awesome. So let's see. So for Thursday, you have 3 sketches, just like for the last painting. You're going to do 3 sketches. What I also would like you to do is tell me which colors you would like to use. So when we look at our color wheel, and I did in the analogous color scheme folder under course content, I did post the color wheel that's in the book on page 94, I think. So look at that, and that's what you'll use. So you're going to use secondary colors, primary colors, and tertiary colors if you'd like. So you can choose 3 or 4. And so on the side of your sketches, just write down, I'm going to use yellow, yellow, green, and green. And you can go all the way to blue-green in that case if you want. So just think about that and do the reading, page 94 to 105. And oh, one last thing, which I will post this on Blackboard. It seems like a few people forgot to post their image on the master copy critique page, critique discussion board. So if you can do that as soon as you can, and I'll post this on Blackboard right when we get off so people remember. But there's 3 people that have not posted. So please go ahead and do that so that the other students can comment on your critiques. Any questions or concerns or ideas yet? Okay, cool. Well, that's all I have for you. So next week is spring break, but I'm going to hopefully be posting the demonstration of portraits or skin tones before then. And over spring break, these projects aren't due till the 22nd. So you have time, but yeah, make sure to have your sketches in by Thursday so that Friday I'll be able to approve them and then you can start painting.
Okay.
All right. I will see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. No problem. Bye.